We accomplished the task of the first day of the war, but only on the third day in the second half. The task for the sake of which the war had been started proved unattainable. No sooner had my company passed a few hundred meters, but it was delayed. The road along which the company was to advance led through a forested area where Soviet border guards, serving on watchtowers, had built shelters for themselves in conveniently located bunkers. The first platoon, under the command of a lieutenant with one gun and one machine gun, came under intense rifle and machine gun fire, which it was met by the Russians from the shelter. The lieutenant ordered the other gun crews to dismount and try to bypass the firing point. Meanwhile, the lead gun took the border guards under fire. But wherever the lieutenant directed his unit, it encountered vigorous resistance everywhere. It seemed that the Russians had concentrated a company or a whole battalion in the forest. Apparently, our intelligence was deeply miscalculated. Then I ordered the second platoon to dismount and advance to the right through the forest in a wide arc, while the third platoon made its way to the left through the grove to attack the enemy from the rear. This purely infantry tactic had been used by us many times in exercises of anti-tank units. It succeeded this time, but the attack lasted more than 4 hours. Meanwhile, the road on which the troops were moving was blocked. Behind us accumulated vehicles of the regimental headquarters and 2 other anti-tank companies, a sapper battalion and an artillery unit. We had already had casualties. A lieutenant was wounded, 2 machine gunners were killed. The platoon command was taken by the platoon commander, a cadre field officer. Once again the firefight resumed, the Soviet border guards fired from all barrels, and then there was silence. Undoubtedly, both platoons had outflanked the enemy and forced him to cease resistance. Slowly, from cover to cover, we approached the wood-annery structure. But what we saw there astonished us greatly. The bunker was not a fortified structure at all, but only a primitive shelter, made of light tree trunks on which the earth had been piled. The shelter had room for only 8 riflemen. Scattered around the hut were camp flasks, cooking utensils, and many empty cartridges. Behind a small earthen berm lay 3 dead Soviet soldiers. The machine gun they had been firing had disappeared. Their comrades had taken it with them when they ran out of ammunition. Consequently, we were not fighting against a battalion, or a company, or even a full platoon. A small group of border guards delayed us for 4 hours, forced us to turn around in the battery behind us to take up a fighting position, inflicted casualties on us, and then fled. Similar situations were repeated many times during the first day of the campaign. And each time it turned out that it was only a few Red Army soldiers who had encamped in extremely skillfully chosen positions and forced us to take the fight. On the third day, when the second platoon was marching at the head of the column, we came under intense machine gun fire from the flank. It was simply impossible to pass on the road. 2 non-commissioned officers and 3 soldiers were already lying dead between the vehicles. We took cover in the ditches and behind the vehicles and surveyed the terrain with binoculars. Finally, we spotted a machine gun behind a haystack. 4 guns and 8 machine guns opened fire. The bursts were clearly visible. But the Soviet machine gun kept firing. We were delayed for almost 2 hours. Again behind us stood waiting for other large units of the division. Finally, the commander of the second company put the calculations of 2 machine guns on motorcycles, so that they drove along the country lane and bypassed the enemy. Suddenly we saw 1 soldier run from the stack, picking up a machine gun. Everyone raised their rifles and, standing up, began to shoot at the fugitive, but he still managed to reach the woods and escape. 1 single soldier paralyzed the actions of our division for 2 hours. No dead were found at the haystack. There were only empty shell casings and a duffel bag. The Russian soldier threw the sack, but not the machine gun. As the German officer Ike Mitteldorf said, the ability to organize defense I consider the strongest side of the Soviet troops. One of the reasons for this lies in the very national character of the Russians. The ability of the Russian soldier to endure everything and die in his trench is an important prerequisite for a persistent and fierce defense. It is complemented by a strong connection of the Russian soldier with nature, which allows him in defense to masterfully equip their positions and camouflage perfectly. In addition, the Russian infantry was superior to the German infantry in a number of important issues of combat training and armament. In particular, the Russians were superior to the Germans in the art of night fighting, fighting in wooded and swampy terrain and fighting in winter, in the training of snipers and in the engineering equipment of positions, as well as in equipping infantry with machine guns and mortars.